So we have all our commanders in place now for the Bane Wars campaign. I'm pleased to say we're going to be starting that in a couple of weeks' time in March. And before we did that, we thought we'd run one more test match, one more friendly, so to speak. Couple of reasons for this. One is to make sure that everyone is au fait with the rules, and of course the rules that we are using are the excellent, fantastic battles. The other thing is we've applied a couple of tweaks to the rules specifically to fit our campaign. Those mainly involve the command structure and also spells and magic use, magic users and wizards, how we use those. Now, I'm not going to go into details on those today. I'll put those up as a separate thing, but this game did give us a chance to work through some of those and to make sure they all worked okay. This is the biggest game we've done so far. We had 6 players, each with a 1,000-point army, plus their character figures. We used an 8x6 table, as you'll see. Oh, and if you like the look of the scenery, then check out my earlier upload on making 10mm terrain, because most of this scenery, apart from the map, was all homemade. So do check that out. So in previous matches, whatever the sides were, however many armies we had, we basically lined up on opposite sides of the table and charged in for the most part, really just to get us into the rules and how everything worked. For this battle, I set up a specific scenario, and that's called Tomb of the Lich Queen. And the main point is there are a couple of potential tomb sites on the table, a couple of old ruined towers, and one of those contains the remains or is the resting place of the Lich Queen. So as I said, we've got 6 armies, 6 commanders, each had a slightly different objective. 2 of those objectives centered around finding the Lich Queen. One side want to resurrect her, one side want to destroy her for once and for all. So that was the objective of 2 of the commanders. The other 4 commanders had their own different agendas, different objectives. So what we do to start is meet the commanders, find out what their objectives were, and then we'll see how that played out in the battle. So that's our commanders and their objectives then. Here's the table layout. As I said, this is an 8x6 table. We've got a mat down with some hills placed underneath. They're actually old 28mm hills that I made quite a while ago, and a sort of a scattering of other terrain going on, some woods and a little village, river and roads. Wanted to keep some interest on the table, but keep it fairly bare, as obviously with 6 armies, we're going to need a lot of room to fight. And there's the village at one end of the table. We've got 3 crossings over the river, 2 bridges and a ford. And that bridge and ford in particular were going to be quite hotly contested later on. Here's the armies being deployed. We've got the undead in one corner, the vampires. We've got their allies, the orcs, in the next corner. Just coming onto the edge, the other side of the river there, we've got the Empire humans. And then in the corner just next to them, their allies, the High Elves. There's our other human army, the Knights of Renown. They're going to be looking for the Lich Queen's tomb as well. And then over in this corner, we have the evil Fell Elves with their captured High Elf prisoners, and they're trying to make it to the opposite corner of the board in order to escape. So that's our basic setup. Let's get into turn 1. Oh, and of course I also should mention our objectives there. The 2 towers are in the centre of the board, and one of those is the tomb of the Lich Queen. 2 towers, that rings a bell. Turn 1 then, and everyone's basically just advancing forward. Now you have to bear in mind here that apart from those who are allied, none of the commanders know the objectives of any of the other armies, and this is going to lead to some nice confusion later on between the knights and the Fell Elves here. And here we see Nogbad the Bad getting some sustenance in. Important to go into battle on a full stomach. You know, you want to have lots of energy for the fighting. So suspicion very early on from the High Commander towards those knights on his flank. Of course he doesn't know that their objective is to find and destroy the Lich Queen. And in fact what he should be worried about is that force of High Elves on the far side of the table and their human allies, because they're actually the ones who are coming after him. Meanwhile, at the other end of the table, the orcs and the vampires are just basically advancing towards the towers, hoping to find the Lich Queen. It's going to take at least a turn to resurrect her or to destroy her. Second turn, the orcs continue their advance to the river. They're going for those 2 crossings there. And the humans on the other side are squaring up to protect. They're not sure why the orcs are there, but I don't think they want to let them cross the river. Meanwhile, the evil elves are sending a detachment of cavalry racing ahead to secure the road for their escape, and still worried about those humans on the flank. They put a unit of archers there just as a protective screen perhaps. Those knights of course don't care a thing about the evil elves. They're heading for the tower there to see if they can find the Lich Queen. And you might just be able to see there in the middle of those elves a little odd unit. I think they're actually sort of wraiths or ghosts. We're just using those to represent the prisoners at the moment. And now the eagles come into play. Turn 3 and the vampire cavalry are also racing towards the tower. So we're heading for a nice dust up there between the vampire and knight cavalry units. And meanwhile on the far side of the table we've got a real battle developing for these river crossings. This is starting with a lot of missile fire. I think the humans have got a couple of mortars. They've got a wizard, at least one wizard up in the dirigibles who's throwing magic missiles. We've got the goblins firing bows, I think with poison arrows, so they get a nice bonus for those. Yeah, so there's a lot of missile fire going backward, forward over the river. What have we got there? Oh, there's a couple of 6s there and a 5. A few hits. The knights begin moving the rest of their army up. I think they're a little bit uncertain about what those evil elf archers are doing, and of course the eagles are hovering overhead. The Empire humans, meanwhile, they're moving up to cover the ford. They want to defend that crossing. And they're actually going to move onto the tower there, although of course they have no idea about the Lich Queen or that she might be in there. So for them, it's just a piece of terrain. So yeah, we've got that big missile battle continuing across the river there. The humans are getting the worst of that. I think it's the poison bows of those goblins are taking their toll. And the rest of the orc army are moving up through the village. Some are going for the ford, some for the other bridge. More Knight Cavalry advancing now and deploying from column into line. Still keeping an eye on those elves, I think, and I see there's now 2 units of elf archers watching the humans. No one's making a hostile move yet, but that could all change very soon. And of course we've got the high elves here as well. They're trying to get across the table to reach their captives, to free their prisoners, but I think the knights are getting in their way a bit. So I guess their other plan is to head for the road, because of course they can cut off the escaping elves on the road as well. And there's a general view of the situation. I think this is about the end of turn 3, or we're just getting into turn 4. The only real casualties so far have been from all that missile fire on the riverbank there. No one else has really come to blows yet, but we're getting close. And that missile battle continues into the next turn. They're really throwing everything at each other, these two sides here. And as you can see, the orcs are almost on the ford. They've got to form up into a column to get across it, which should just give the humans time to block the other end. The dirigibles are still in play there, though I think they're taking a bit more of an interest in the vampire army at this stage. And while the fell elf cavalry and the units guarding the prisoners press on towards the road, the rest of their army, the eagles and the archers, have now turned to face the knights, most of whom are pressing onwards towards the tower. The high elves are heading for the road, and we have a battle for the ford impending. The humans are really taking heavy losses in this missile battle now. They're losing that battle. Another unit goes, and that really leaves the bridge open. So this is where the humans decide to open fire with their mortars on the bridge to see if they can destroy it. And the undead legions are the first to reach one of the towers. They just about beat the knights there. So they're going to spend a turn searching. And it's just a dice roll, a 1 to 3, and the Lich Queen is in there. 4 to 6, she's in the other tower. We've got the heavy cavalry moving up to cover. The rest of the legions are slowly coming up across the road, but they're mostly skeletons. They're quite a heavy unit. We've got a heavy guard skeleton units, but they only move 2, so obviously the cavalry are racing ahead. We've got a charge there going in from the skeleton cavalry just to keep some pressure on the knights, but the opposing unit are skirmishers and they manage to easily evade. And the orcs make the ford, or the goblin riders at least, just manage to get onto the ford. So they've got the Empire troops there lining up, and also a lot of high elves coming in behind them. And we've still got this sort of face-off going on between the knights and the fell elves. I think those archers have turned one way and then the other, and it looks like they've got knight units both in front and behind them. Though, again, the eagles are flying top cover. But still no one's made the first move yet. And here we can see the High Commander deliberating what to do next. He's got his prisoners guarded there. They're moving up to the road. His cavalry are almost at the road. And he's decided he's going to go for the knights with the archers. While the vampires are busy searching the tower, there's more of the knight units moving up. And this is the end of turn 6 now. We've got the legions of undead slowly moving up, not quite at the road yet, although the advanced units are in the tower. We've got the fell elves at the road. That unit guarding the prisoners is coming up behind. And then we've got this little potential fracas developing with the knights. And we've got that battle for the ford about to kick off. And on the centre of the table we have the high elves advancing, particularly the cavalry. They're heading towards the road to cut off their enemy's retreat. But of course there's some undead units in front of them, so here they start firing at the skeleton cavalry. And naturally enough, that elven bowfire proves extremely effective and the skeletons are wiped out. Now I mentioned that the Empire humans wanted to destroy that bridge. They want to stop those orcs coming across. So they're firing on it with their mortars. Now this is not something we've had before, firing at structures. So we just gave the bridge 10 points and they rolled for damage as normal. In fact they destroyed it in a couple of turns. So activation phase for turn 7 now, and we start with our evil elves. And we've got a unit of archers doing another 180 there. So we've got one unit facing off towards the knights at the back there. And there's now also that threat of the advancing high elf army come to reclaim those captives. And there's a quick view of the overall situation. I have to say again, these 10mm figures look great as armies. I think you really do get a sense of massed units and massed forces on the table. But now the high elves are in range for a charge, so they charge into that eagle unit. But that, of course, being a flying unit, is able to evade fairly easily. But nonetheless, the high elves are now involved in the action. The vampire units have spent a turn exploring that ruin, and they've also brought the necromancer up, because of course you need a you need a good necromancer, or even an evil one, to resurrect a Lich Queen. But disaster strikes. This tower is empty. So that means that the remains of the Lich Queen are over there in the other tower. And look at all those troops in between. So not looking good for the undead now. Meanwhile, the knights, who I think are getting a bit fed up of having pointy arrows in their direction, decide to bring up and deploy their own archers. Perhaps they're getting ready to fire on the fell elves. And the Empire humans have charged in to head off those goblin riders at the ford. And they've got them nicely trapped on the ford there. They didn't have quite enough movement to get across. Some of the other orc units are racing for that bridge that is under fire. You can see a damage counter already on there. Unfortunately, they're not going to get there before the bridge is destroyed. And finally, perhaps in response to those archers moving up, the fell elves decide to attack the knights, and they send an eagle unit in to come in on the flank of that advanced unit. Now, we're not sure if we got this right. We think the eagles probably should have charged into the front rather than the flank attack here. So that's something we'll be checking out later on. But nonetheless, that has really kicked things off over on that corner of the table now. So the location of the tomb of the Lich Queen is revealed, and once the high elves get wind of this, they immediately move their mage into that tower, with the aim of destroying her, of course, which is completely in keeping with the high elf army. They want to be rid of this evil as well. And we get the high elf dragon rider charges in to those elf archers, and we're going to get quite a battle developing here between the two elf armies, particularly involving those eagles. The battle at the ford begins, and the goblin riders take quite a lot of damage, but they're still there. They're still holding their position. Back into the firing phase now, and we have some shooting between the fell elves and the knights. And here in the centre, The High Elves, having wiped out the skeleton cavalry, now want to clear those wolves out the way, so they open fire on the wolf pack. And into turn 8 activation, the Vampire Knights, frustrated perhaps at not finding the Lich Queen, decide to charge that unit of knights in front of them, who fail to evade the charge. And meanwhile the High Elf Mage rolls a dice and successfully carries out his ritual to destroy the remains of the Lich Queen. We've got Eagles attacking a High Elf unit there from all directions. And over here is where we had another question. So we had that Eagle attack into the flank of the Knights. And on the second turn we thought, well, do the Knights get to turn to face into the attack? And if they do, how does that work? Is it just that one unit being attacked that turns, as we show here? Or does the whole unit turn into a column or a line? So we're grateful for any suggestions on how that works. Or do they just stand as they are and the Eagle keeps getting that flank attack bonus? The Eagles don't do great against that High Elf unit. I think they're quite a tough cavalry unit. And for the Vampires, the Wolves are going to find out the same thing, because they rather foolishly charged that other Elf cavalry unit that was firing at them, and they're about to be wiped out. I'm not quite sure why the Wolves charged the cavalry, but you know, they were facing the right way and they were feeling a bit peckish. Now that cavalry melee by the tower, well, that was pretty even. That worked out even casualties, so nothing decisive happened there. Back into our shooting phase, and we've got High Elves and Knights and Fell Elves all shooting at each other over here. Well, mostly shooting at the Fell Elves, to be honest. So we're coming to the end of the battle now, and the Vampires, now that the Lich Queen has been destroyed, well, they've got no reason to be here, so they're going to start withdrawing. They've got that cavalry skirmish going on, but as you'll see, the bulk of their army is still back on the road there, so they're going to start pulling back. They'll most likely take the Orcs with them. The Orcs have failed to get across the river there at all. That ford is still being held. Now, we've got the prisoners here. They're probably going to make the road and get along it. I don't think the High Elves are going to catch those in time, although the High Elves, potentially with the aid of the Empire humans, they could still possibly get across and cut the road off further up. So that is sort of open to speculation. The Knights, well, the Lich Queen has been destroyed, so although they didn't quite do it themselves, their objective has been achieved. So they're likely to start withdrawing as well, if they can extricate themselves from this scrap going on here. So we pretty much called it a day there. I guess we could have continued with the High Elves chasing the Fell Elves to see if they could have escaped off that far corner of the table. But everyone else was going to be withdrawing at this stage. So a few interesting things that came out of this battle. I feel that this was the most realistic game that we've done so far, in that, as I said, normally we line up and charge each other. But I think here, each army having specific objectives gave us a lot more focus and a lot more sort of room for tactics and strategy. It's not just a case of charging in. We felt that this also ties in nicely with our campaign setting, because of course in a campaign you have to think about the next battle and the one after that, so you're not going to risk your troops needlessly. And this will bring us into other areas of how we cover retreats and so on, how we deal with casualties at the end of a battle. And one more thing that came out with this, so the High Elves destroyed the Lich Queen, although that wasn't their objective, but when they discovered that she was there, that seemed very in keeping with what a High Elf force would do. However, we might speculate if that had been another force, let's say some sort of neutral type humans, there's the possibility that they could have taken the Lich Queen with them and then later on come to some sort of bargain or agreement with the vampires. You know, we'll give you the Lich Queen if you attack these people, something like that. So that plays nicely into our campaign narrative as well. And that's one aspect I'm looking forward to, all that wheeler dealing and negotiation that's going on behind the scenes, as well as the actual battles themselves. Anyway, a big thanks to all the commanders who took part in that battle. We had a good time. I hope you had fun watching that as well. You know, there's a few things came up in the rules, as there's always going to be, but this one, considering 6 players and 1,000-point armies, there was a lot of figures on the table, but it all went very smoothly as far as the movement and activation and all the rest of it goes. So we feel like we're really getting the hang of the Fantastic Battles rule set now. And of course we all enjoy that aspect of being able to make up our own armies exactly as we wish. And I think now people have got a little bit more experience. There's going to be some quite creative armies coming up. There we are then, quite a big game, as I'm sure you'll agree, but a lot of fun. And of course, as usual, a couple of issues get thrown up that we can resolve at the time, or we can go away and research and find out how we should be doing it properly. But the command structure worked. We didn't get too much into the spells. There wasn't a lot of magic use in this one, but I can't really foresee any problem with those. If you do have any suggestions or advice, or you can see that we're doing some things wrong, please do feel free to post a comment below. We're also getting some good tips and advice, of course, from the Fantastic Battles Facebook group, so I'll put a link up to that below as well. Do check that out. Not only can you speak to the author of the rules, but there's lots of other groups on there putting up ideas, putting up their own battles. Some of them are using 10mm, some 28mm. Some are even coming out of the fantasy genre and going into ancients and Napoleonics, that kind of stuff. So an excellent group if you're using the Fantastic Battles rule set. Okay, that's it for today then. Do check out that other upload if you're interested in building some 10mm terrain. And of course, keep an eye out here for further updates on the Bane Wars. As always, if you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe. Thanks for all the comments that are coming in. Thanks to everyone who's subscribed so far, and I'll see you next time.